turn over the talk to Justin.
Thank you.
All right, and appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.
For coming out.
It's the first time I've used this phone for a keynote remote, so bear with me if things get a little wacky. Welcome, you guys. Really excited to see a lot of new faces and some familiar ones tonight. I know there's a lot of back-end programmers in the room, so hopefully this gives some enlightenment to the front-end side of things. I am a front-end developer, and I'm super passionate about new front-end technologies, just advancing the whole front-end world. So welcome to the future of front-end. To give you a little bit of information about myself, I'm a native to the Charlotte area. I was actually born over on Presbyterian, right around the corner from here. 40 years old, just turned 40 this summer, increasing all the gray hairs in my beard, my hair, as well as this thing growing right here as I get older. I live in Plaza Midwood, East Charlotte area with my wife Allison and my son Hollis. Here are their wonderful mugs. He's a super cool guy. He is learning how to use a tablet right now, so here's our future, full stack programmer. I'm currently a front-end developer here at Ray Ward. I've been here about a year and a half or so. Super great place to work. Love my teammates. We work on really awesome projects, and we're kind of given the freedom to explore new stuff and do cool stuff like this. I definitely have a big, like I said, passion for front end. Lately, I've really been interested in stuff like interaction, performance, which is really big in the front end community right now, really perfecting our tooling and working on animation stuff. All right, so why am I giving this presentation and why are you here tonight? We are definitely in a new era of front-end development. And when I say eras, we talk about the history of front-end. So we have, we started with tables and then move into divs. And oh my God, that was such a big, and I came from building sites and tables. And let me tell you, when I moved to divs, I was like, what? Head explode. Flash, nobody talks about that anymore. We've got CSS3, which came out, and everybody was super excited about all the new stuff that added in. Then we have HTML5, which just enhances everything. SVGs, animation, got into responsive design, which totally changed the picture for all of us. Now we have things like WebVR, module thinking and module design patterns, and of course agile and design thinking. So now we have new things like grid and Flexbox, so a total layout revolution and a complete change to the way we're going to lay out pages moving forward. We definitely have new stuff with progressive web apps, which has been pushed really big with Google lately. We'll talk about that a little bit more. And performance, obviously, performance is huge right now. Everything that we do, we try to make sure that it's performant and your app or website or whatever your web product is going to get to the viewer as fast as possible without any glitches. So the goals for this evening, I'm going to help solve some of the usual headaches of these cumbersome solutions that we have to deal with on everyday design challenges, and you guys all know what I'm talking about, from polling how far have I scrolled, is this thing hit the top of the viewport yet, is this sticky? It's, some of that stuff, it works, but there's got to be a better solution to it. I want to introduce some new solutions and features that can help you improve your development, save time, and prevent some of those headaches that we all hate. Take away new stuff that you absolutely can ship tomorrow or tonight if you feel like it when you get home in production, and then start thinking about some of the stuff that you really can't ship in production right now, but you probably will be able to in a year, 2 years, something like that. Pretty big stuff. So a few notes. Not going to be doing any live coding because that's the biggest thing ever for whatever works. Just do some discussions. My CSS examples will be in Sass with the SCSS syntax, so if you're not familiar with that, bear with me or ask me some questions afterwards. Hopefully we're all using something like Sass. Only display normal declarations, meaning I'm not going to crowd up everything that I'm showing with browser prefixes, but you'll see that asterisk at the end. There's some stuff that we do need to talk about browser prefixes. It's pretty important. Actually here at Ray Ward, we use auto prefixer built into our Gulp build to handle and add any browser prefixes that need to happen in post-processing. My JavaScript examples will definitely be in ES6. That's the next generation of JavaScript. And right now we're still post-processing that for transpile. We use Babel and Browserify for that. You could also use Webpack if you're into splitting into modules, because that's a big thinking lately. Whoops, oh my God. That was a huge joke that I just bombed. Hold on, let me get back. Oh my God, I was so looking forward to saying that. Okay, 4-space tabs, always, because to reach full enlightenment, you have to use tabs. No formatting, 4 spaces, we're getting 2 spaces, 4, we're there, tabs, you're there. Full enlightenment. All right, so our agenda this evening, we're going to start talking about modern CSS, which is near and dear to my heart. Most of the code that I write is in CSS. We'll talk about Flexbox. We're going to talk about CSS Grid, which is pretty new. We're going to talk about how Flexbox and Grid can work together to just solve all of your layout issues. Feature queries, also known as supports. Clip paths, where you can clip things. Initial letter. We're going to talk about shape outside, which is a nice, cool way to wrap text around not just a block or a flat edge. Talk about multi-columns, where you can flow content between multiple columns. Backdrop filter and background blend modes, which are really awesome mimics of Photoshop filters and things like that you can apply to background images or inline images. Then we'll talk about variables, which I use variables all the time in Sass, but now they're coming up in pure CSS, so we're starting to get parity between moving away from post-processing stuff to just core. Then we'll move into some new APIs that HTML5 are offering. Intersection observer, probably my favorite thing to help alleviate when you're trying to say, is this thing hitting the top of the viewport? Am I intersecting with an object? Do I make it sticky? Do I do stuff like lazy load, etc.? Resize observer. We all know that detecting events when viewport resize happens is kind of a pain, so this will help speed up that. Mutation observer. Observe changes to anything a mutation event, changing a class name, ID, attribute, something like that. Performance observer, so performance being really big, and if you're getting into progressive web apps, performance is like number 1 with that. Fetch API, which is going to be an awesome replacement for AJAX and XML HTTP request. Push API, which will provide you the ability to push notifications to a browser or whatever. Payment handler and request APIs, which are super new and not really supported as much right now, but will provide a real condensed and solid, how am I going to say this? A great way to consolidate all the different ways that payments are handled and security and all of that into one API. And then we'll talk about some of the APIs that are out that are definitely a progressive web app interest, like vibration, screen orientation, page transition, page visibility, full screen, and Bluetooth APIs. And then we'll get into some of the stuff that's coming up in the future. We'll review the CSS working group and how their stages work. We'll talk about font display patterns, position sticky, which is pretty cool, matches and not selectors, CSS element queries, object fit and object position, image set, media query ranges, color mod and gray, nesting, and when else rules. So we got a lot of stuff to cover this evening. Hopefully I'll be able to get through everything, and I'm trying to keep the cadence going well, so let's hold questions till the end if we can. Let's start with modern CSS and Flexbox. Who's using Flexbox right now? Awesome. Shipping it to production?
Yes.
Sweet. What Flexbox is a layout method of positioning elements in either a horizontal or a vertical stack. It's intended to accommodate different screen sizes, different display devices by adapting the width and height of flex boxes to vary based on the display space. Our first concept in Flexbox is the flex container. So a little bit of markup here. Say we have a list, we have list items, 3 list items here. We've got elements inside the list item where we're just kind of saying hello world. So what we're going to apply our class stuff to is our parent class. And what we're focusing on initially is where our axes are. So our main axis is our X horizontal axis. Cross axis is going to go vertical, so that's our Y axis. And as we position items with Flex code, we're going to concern based on how we're positioning items this way or how we're positioning items this way. So simple enough, you just say display flex. You can also have inline flex if you're positioning something inline. But for tonight's examples, we'll be focusing just on a display flex. rows and columns. So think of, we've got our main container here, we've got our axis. So we're going to tell it which direction I want to lay out the child items within the flex container. So you have two options. One, flex direction column, which means it's going to be in a column, just like a block level element. You also have column reverse, which is pretty cool. So say I've got this element down here and it's got a different class name or something like that. You can totally move it up to the top without any of your markup changing. You just tell it to reorder and wrap the element to the top there. You also have flex direction row, which means things are going to wrap in a row instead of being in a column. You can also have row reverse. Same rules apply. We've got a special class or something on this right here. It's my last element in the markup. CSS is going to order it reverse. Wrap is very important. So we want to consider what are these elements going to do as this container starts to shrink. So you have flex wrap property where you tell it don't wrap any of the items, don't move anything down. And as our container starts moving, these items are going to start moving their widths in to accommodate the constraint that we're putting on the container. But that's kind of a code smell because flex wrap, no wrap is the default value for flex wrap. So any item that you display flex to, you're going to get this out of the box for free. So we don't want to have that in there. But say we do want to wrap items, we don't want things to be resizing, and we've got a fixed width or something on our child items, we just tell it to wrap. And as our container starts moving in, it keeps its width, and then it just wraps down to the next row. You can also tell it wrap reverse. So as things start wrapping, the item that was going to wrap is going to go to the top, and it's just going to start building down from the top at that point. Main axis location. Again, we're focused on our parent element, we're focused on our main axis location, and justify content is the property that we're going to use to tell the Flexbox how we want to position and space these child elements in it. So here we have our elements, justify content, flex start. You see I've got it labeled red, it's a code smell. Yep, that's what we get out of the box. So we're going to tell it to justify it to the flex end instead. This forces all the elements to the end of the container on that side. We can also say justify content to the center, and it's going to center everything in the middle. This is super handy because if you try to do this outside of Flexbox, it's a big pain. Space between is probably my favorite part of ordering child elements. Forces everything to the edge and then spaces any remainders in the middle. Great for navigations, things like that, where you're not really concerned about the widths of these items, but you do want it to fill out the entire space. Space around is the property that tells the Flexbox I want an equal amount of space between each of my child items and the gutters on the side. So this is a great way if you're not in control of the widths or the values of whatever these child items are, you can still have a nice looking display of elements there. Cross-axis location, again, we're focused on our parent item, cross-axis, which is our vertical axis. You can tell align items stretch. That means that these items are going to fill out the entire box vertically. But again, code smell, that's the default value that we get out of the box free from Display Flex. So we're not going to put that in there. And really, all of the examples that I've shown you so far, that's really what they're going to look like because I'm not putting constraints on these child items. So Flexbox is going to say, hey, I'm going to try to stretch this out and fill out the property or the box that you're giving me. That's not always ideal. So we have a different properties here for aligned items. We can tell it again, flex start. It's going to keep the size that the element containers here have and not try to make it full container. It's also going to force it to the top of the viewport. The rest of them just carry over from our x-axis. Flex end forces everything to the end. Line items in the center, going to the center of my box. Baseline, say we want to align on the baseline of the terms here, but what if that changes? What if this one's way down here and this is up here? So it's going to align and keep your baseline of your text as the marker for this alignment. Ordering, this is another cool thing that Flexbox allows us to do. And these are going to focus, we're going to focus this on the child elements. And let's say that this last item, I want it to be an exit slide instead of saying, hello world, have a nice day. But what if I want to move that to the front for some reason? I don't know why I would do that. So I would say, just create your child item here. Again, this is SAS right here where I'm inheriting this class to this class. Just give it an order of 1. It's going to force that to be the first element in the row. Now, my markup hasn't changed, as you see. I'm still down here at the bottom, but visually, this is the first element. Sizing. So again, we're focused on our child elements here, not the parent. We're focused on that last element that we just did. I want to tell it flex grow by 2. And what this does, it's going to take up twice as much space as the rest of these. But you may be looking at this and saying, this doesn't seem like 2 of those. This is way, way bigger. Well, that's because I haven't given a constraint to these child elements. I'm just telling Flexbox, hey, just make this as big as possible, but then leave a little room for these guys and let them size themselves based on whatever their elements are inside. So really, that wasn't really what we were trying to do. I was really trying to make it twice the size. So what we can do is, whoops, I think I missed a slide, I'm sorry. I tell the parent element, flex grow 1, and then this element itself to flex grow 2. So then that tells the Flexbox, hey, make this one twice as big, but these need to also grow to be proportional to whatever container space that I have. And all of this will adjust as your viewport changes. There's also flex shrink. So say I want to do the opposite of that. I want to say, make this one twice, or half the size of what these are. Flex shrink totally comes into the picture right there. Now you don't really want to have to put, flex grow 1 on every single item. So a cool thing out of the box that you can do is tell it to give a flex basis. That's going to kind of be a placeholder and say, all right, if any of my child items have, or sibling items may have a specific size, or I'm telling it to gain a little bit more or a little bit less space, just do proportional for these. So that can carry through, and if you're not doing any sizing of a sibling element, then this just never really does anything. All right, main axis item location. Again, this is specifically about our items, not our parent. And we're going to focus on this last item that we've added a little extra to. There's our axes again. So I'm going to tell it I want to align just this item, to the flex start. And if you remember earlier, I told you that this is going to grow. So when I tell this item to, reduce itself and then align it to the top of the viewport, then it's going to do that, and the rest of them are going to size appropriately. Same syntax applies here. Align self to the flex end, force that one to the bottom. Center it in the middle, let those 2 sizes appropriate. Baseline, same rules apply. We're just going to baseline the text. If that changes, then our baseline changes. Align self stretch is absolutely the opposite of that. What if I want to tell it, these actually do have some specifics in it and have a specific height, but I want this one to do, free out of the box, Flexbox height. That's a quick way to do that. And cross-axis item location, again, focused on our child items. There's our cross-axis, which is our vertical axis. But, hey, what am I doing up here? This is already, I just said that this was in here. So this is where we kind of get into some opinions. We're going to tell everything that we're going to stretch. It's going to fill out the content as my viewport changes. And maybe this height changes a little bit. It's going to size appropriately. I've also, remember, I told it to wrap, so it's going to wrap. But again, this is a kind of a code smell. That's what comes out of the box for free, so we don't want to do that. Flex start. Again, we're going to align everything to the top. Center, we're going to go to the center. End, we're going to go to the end. Anybody notice anything weird right here? Did you notice that my content inside here also was changing? So this is where I get a little bit opinionated. Again, space between, if this had another text, it would be, forcing this to the top, this to the bottom. Space around, again, it's positioning here. It's also positioning my child items. But wait, opinions. I'm a developer. I have opinions about things. Go figure. Kind of don't feel like this applies because I'm applying this rule to my parent, but really this affects my child items. So wouldn't it be great if we were able to say, align all this content to the center, but only for these items? Nah, Flexbox doesn't let us do that. And there's really no way to say, just align my content differently. So we just have to deal with this for right now. Be cautious if you use this, because keep in mind, another sibling or child item that you may need to position differently, you're going to be battling this because this is going to cascade down to all of your child items, and it's going to try to position all the content inside of those child items to whatever rules you're applying here. So I try not to use this as much as possible just because those rules are, kind of hard to overcome. So your mileage may vary there. Couple caveats. Mixed width items can get kind of tricky because if you're trying to say, I want to keep this at some specific width and then do whatever Flexbox wants to do with the rest of them, you may not get the results that you're looking for. Once you're in, you're in. It's the Hotel California rule. You can check in, but you can never check out. Once you get into Flexbox, you can't really override those rules once you get down as they cascade down. So just keep that in mind. Whoops. If you're trying to position specific children, that can get tricky as well because, a lot of these positioning rules are applying to every child item. And you're applying it to the parent, and that's going to override everything. It's a lot of markup. You saw I was adding quite a bit of stuff there. Kind of. It's kind of a trade-off. Like, we're getting a lot of power from this for positioning and laying out stuff. So for me, the balance there, if I have to add 5 more lines of code to the style sheet, I'm going to add 5 more lines of code to the style sheet because the power this gives me totally overrides that. Reorder. Remember when I moved that element to the top, but my markup was down here? That's big accessibility concern there because the screen reader is going to see that and it's not going to read it in the same order that you're trying to visually present it. So to override that, you want to try to use RA labels, roles, make sure that your markup is semantic and valid, and that's going to help the browser at least understand what your intention is for the content that you're presenting. Browser support, you can see we're pretty evergreen across the board here. We're at global 97.74%, so for me, that's a winner. I'm shipping this to production right away. But, oh my God, we got a lot of issues here. So this is from Can I Use? If you're not familiar with that, I would definitely put that on your bookmark bar because I reference this all the time, specifically for these things, because once you get into your debugging, it's 4 days until the project has to launch, and you're like, why the hell is this doing this in IE11? This will get you where you're going. So I'm not going to go through all of these. They're really specific use cases, but keep that in mind. So let's talk about performance. I found this article just the other week because I haven't been able to find much about, is this really performant or how does this compare to using floats or something like that? So these guys, of course, at Google are all about performance, and this is a great article. And they basically said Flexbox performs better than float-based layouts. They gave 2 stacks here. So you can see, this is kind of crazy. I don't know if anybody would ever do this, but it says, this shows the layout cost when using floats on 1,300 boxes. Like, what? What website would ever do that? Admittedly, a contrived example because most applications will use a variety of means to position the elements. But what we're important here is we're looking at our layout paint model. That's a long time. That's 14 milliseconds that it took to paint all that. Versus Flexbox, 3 milliseconds. We have a longer start time, and I'm not really sure what the gist is with that, but I mean, that's still huge savings right there. So I'm going to go ahead and say it. Flexbox performs better than float-based layouts, according to Google. Don't quote me on that. I'm going to step up on the soapbox for a minute here about Flexbox. Watch out with your older Safari and IE. You're definitely going to have to use your browser prefixes on that. Don't think that you can get away with it because it's just going to choke and you're just going to get a bunch of stuff stacked up. So make sure you have your fallback support with floats, and you could also use a feature query, which we're going to talk about here in a moment. Using production, absolutely. In my opinion, Flexbox should really be your default layout pattern that you're using, your model. So let's get into CSS Grid, which is just right there with Flexbox layout model allowing a page to be divided into major regions, allowing to define the relationship in terms of size, position, and the layer between parts of a control built from HTML primitives. Wow, that was really lawyer speak. Basically what that says, it creates a two-dimensional grid system directly in CSS. Requires less media query intervention, really powerful functions like auto layout, min-max, repeat, and autofill, which we'll get into those. Main concepts, we're going to talk first about the grid container. I've got a little bit of markup here. This is pretty standard. You got a container, main element, you've got a header. Say we got a body, we got a little bit of content in that. The body probably has a sidebar in it for a search or something. Then we got a footer. That's pretty much your holy grail of layouts. Here it is in its beautiful sense. Again, just as simple. We just do display grid on the container. Our grid lines. So see these boundaries that I've set up here. Your grid lines are the beginning and ends of columns and rows, which are concepts that we'll talk about here in a moment. To set these up, we have two properties here. We have grid template columns and grid template rows. Now you may be asking, what in the heck is that? So Flexbox introduces a new measurement value called a fraction. And essentially what I'm telling this, I want to create two columns in my layout. The first column, I want it to take as much space as it needs to. Take up as much space as possible, and then whatever's left in the second column, a fraction of that space. But I'm telling it one fraction, so really that's just going to take up whatever the remainder of that space is. That could be 0.5, that could be 0.25. Heck, you could make it say 2, and it would take up twice as much space. Grid template rows, I'm establishing the rows of that grid. First row, I want it to be 150 pixels. Min-max, oh, what's that? Another cool thing that the grid has given us, I tell it minimum of 300 pixels tall. The maximum I want it to take up the space vertically is going to be whatever the content is, and it's not going to grow any higher than that. My final row is going to be 100 pixels tall. Grid areas. So anything that a grid row contains is going to be a grid area. So this is a grid area. We have our grid row start, our grid column start, grid column end, grid row end, and whatever that frames is going to be that area. This is a grid area too, because as you see, I've got bounding areas here. That's a grid area. All of these are grid areas, really. So let's focus on our header, and I'm going to tell it to take the grid area and span both of the columns that are there and move itself to the second one. I'm going to take the body and I'm going to tell it span the entire thing. The sidebar, I'm going to give it a property at the beginning and tell it to bump itself over one column, span the entire distance of it. Our footer, I'm going to tell it to span the entire area and take up both of the columns that are there. Grid tracks, again, anything that is within a boundary. So say that my element moves a little bit and I'm outside of this. This is still a grid track, so keep that in mind even if the element is going to blow out. Grid cell, that's a cell. Whoops, thought I had another slide in there, sorry. Gutters. So of course you can apply gutters and that's just going to move your grid lines. This doesn't create a cell, so anything that's outside of a grid line but inside of the, or I'm sorry, inside of this but outside of the margin is still a cell. Grid axis, here's your inline or your row axis, and your vertical is going to be your block or your column axis. Row, again, this is your grid row, grid column. So here's a whole grid row, and you can see it spans the entire, like the row is not even concerned really about what's inside of it. It's just, here's a row, and here's a column. So you see I've got 2 columns here, 3 rows. And this is where the magic happens, and I'm not going to get too deep into this because this would be a whole talk of its own to get into the power of grid. But say I want to move the search up to the top. I had a Swoop and Poop come in at the last minute and said, nope, our board says that we have to have the search at the top. It's up here in the header now. This is pretty cool. What I can say is, instead of just using these arbitrary values or trying to figure out where I'm in, I actually can name these template areas, which is super cool. First part of the column in this row is header, header. Next row, I've got first column is going to be body. I'm naming the other one sidebar, footer, footer. So all I have to do is just say, hey, move my sidebar up to the first row and then take its header column. And because there's two here, and they're both named header, and we already have an element that's in here, this knows that it's going to move to the second part of the element. If the header and I took out stuff and there were two, it's just going to move to the first one. This is an amazing website, Grid by Example. It's Sarah, and I can't think of how to say her last name, from Lebanon. She is like the guru when it comes to grid. Please bookmark this and study all the patterns and everything in here. Man, she has gone and tried to lay out every single issue that you could come up with and really gets into the deep and the finite rules of grid. I mean, it's endless. There's so many cool layouts in here. She talks about stuff moving over, how to order, how to let things auto flow, way more stuff than we have time to get into tonight. So how do Grid and Flexbox work together to create this holy grail? Oh my God, you guys, I keep skipping the jokes. What am I doing here? I've worked so hard. I showed everybody in Bray Ward all of these slides, and they're like, what are you talking about? And I was like, dude, hold on to your butts here. What does it matter what I'm talking about? So use either or both, really depending on your support level and your layout requirements. We really prefer to use Grid for the main layout architecture. Grid performance is so much better than Flexbox for entire page layout paints. It's really what it's there for. We want to prefer Flexbox for child element layout architecture because that's really where its concerns are, is how I'm going to order and lay out the child elements. Whoops, I think I'm going backwards, sorry. So, as an example, this is a site that we just launched a couple months ago for Hearst Jaws of Life, based in Shelby. And when Josh gave me this design, I saw this thing here, and I was like, ooh, how the hell am I going to lay that out? He also then told me, oh yeah, I need this to, keep in a column, and all this stuff needs to size properly. And it's got to do that when it gets to mobile. And I was like, oh man, this is going to be a challenge. So let me make sure I have the audio on here because I worked really hard on this. I'm going to show you what this site does whenever we move in and out. But the song that you hear is totally what I hear every single time I do this in a browser. We're the only people that do this. Like, nobody goes to a website and says, oh, I wonder what this is going to do whenever I move in and out. So I'm like, yep, this is totally the life that we live right now. We're the only people concerned with this. But what I want you to see is that, I've got a fixed height, and I'm really concerned with this, but I want all of those other items to start sizing themselves properly within that area. So thinking of other ways to lay this out, I was like, nope, none of that's going to work. I'm going to have to use Grid for this. So as you can see, I've set up, this is specifically only for this hero area. The rest of the page uses Flexbox for all of its layout, but I've got my grid lines, got a couple columns set up here, got a grid cell here just for my hero image. I've got another grid cell over here for this concern. And then these areas I've broken into, spaces based on the row. And then I'm telling that container, align these items with Flexbox so that I can keep this image and this content spaced properly away from each other. Same thing here. I want this arrow to the bottom, and I want this text to be up top, no matter size, width, height, any of that stuff. So you can see I've got another cell down here, and then I'm concerned about these two cells that are part of that two-column part. Let's get into feature queries. How would I be able to tell a browser, hey, apply this stuff to for Grid if you support it? If not, then bug off, I guess. CSS feature queries is create a feature query for testing support of a specific CSS property, similar to what Modernizer does. I'm sure a lot of you probably use Modernizer every day. This really offloads feature testing responsibility to the browser where it belonged the entire time. Like, why should I sit there and have to ask, do you support this? Do you support that? Do you support this? Support that? Why can't the browser just say, yeah, man, I understand that rule. I'm going to go for it right now. It totally eliminates the JavaScript dependency for feature testing. So, right now, this is the song and dance that we go through for feature testing. You've got to load in Modernizer. It's got to load pretty quick. Probably going to load it in the head because I want it to start activating pretty quickly. Then it's going to apply a class to an HTML element and blah, blah, blah. I'm going to get no flex box. And then I'm going to say, hey, I'm targeting that. And I'm going to go back to my markup. And I'm going to say, hey, I'm displaying flex. But then I got to support something in no flex box. And then I got to do all this crap in here. And then, oh, man, now I've got to float stuff. So now I've got to include a clear fix. And then I got to float left. Oh, but everything's got to have a margin right in it. But I don't want that last child to do it. Blah. What? What are we doing? Why are we doing this all the time? This is where supports is going to save us a ton of grief and a lot of code as well. So go back to my original example here. I'm displaying flex. What I really want to do is have the fallback first for unsupported browsers. And then I'm going to use this rule saying, do you support display flex? Then go for it. If you don't, go back to this total old school stuff. And we're applying our rule there. Also offers a not supports. So I could say, here's my list, but what if I want to do it backwards? I could say, supports, but then if you don't support display flex, then go for the clear fix. This is a little bit dangerous, because keep in mind, not every browser supports. Chicken before the egg, So really the pattern that you saw previously where I'm displaying block and floating the elements, that's where you really want, the cascade to work properly. We've got an OR support also. Oh wait, there's a catch. So does anybody see anything weird with this? There's no browser prefixes. Oh, those damn browser prefixes, they're back. So remember how I said earlier I auto prefix everything? This is where that's never really going to work. And if you're using a preprocessor, your mileage may vary when it comes to things like support. So really, this is what you've got to do. If you're supporting things with iOS 6 or below, IE 10 below, older Safari, you're going to have to work in your browser prefixes to the supports rule because the support's only going to look for display flex. So WebKit doesn't actually support display flex at that stage, and this is just what we have to do. So this is where OR comes in. Don't have to do this all the time. It all depends on what your browser support stack is. And the AND supports where you can chain together different support rules. So Firefox has, for some reason, they created their own rule for justify content called space evenly, even though we already had kind of one that did that. So I don't know what they're doing there, but I could apply this rule and say if you support display flex and you support justify content space evenly, which is Firefox only, then go ahead and apply those rules. And a JavaScript event. So you may need this in the future. It's out there for us. What we would do is just create our value. We would poll our CSS object, and we could either give it a property name and a specific value, or you could just say, do you support this condition? And then, this is ES6 right here. We could have a const value. We would just set up, that, and then pass a Boolean over. You could do stuff if it does support it. If not, do some alternate stuff. This does add a little bloat to your style sheet, but again, we go back to, do you find that balance between the productivity and the power this is giving you versus a few extra lines of code? Once it's gzipped and everything, does that really matter? It's a much better replacement for Modernizer. It kind of depends. What is your support level, and does your browser level support supports again? Your mileage may vary again with pre and post processors. Right now, this thing totally chokes on libsass, so I've just been hand coding them after that. There's no polyfills for older browser support. Sorry. So keep that in mind. This may be something you don't want to ship to production right away. We've got a 92% global support level, but here's our friend IE11, no support. So there's just a few issues. We're not really going to get too much into that. I think those are very, very obscure. So my soapbox again, let me step up on it here. Carefully consider your browser support requirements. Using production, yeah, go for it. But you also need to back it up with Modernizer or similar now if your browser support requires it. Edge saturation. Edge is super awesome and probably going to be the most powerful browser within the next couple of months. We totally expect 10 and 11 to be reaching end of life, hopefully in the next couple of years. So you can see the awesome stuff that the Edge team is putting out. This is a tweet from the 17th. Edge 16 shipping with CSS Grid, Position Sticky, Object Fix, Vmax, bug fixes, tons of stuff. Their releases are incredible. I don't use it, obviously, because I'm on a Mac. So if they could ever fucking release a Mac version, then I would be like, yes, total Microsoft guy. All right, let's move into our next subject, clip paths. So if you've ever done any graphic design, you know that you're always going to clip something. This creates a clipping region that defines what part of the element should be displayed. Portions outside of the region are not shown. It's great for things like angled layouts. And I know you may have, if you've ever worked as long as I have in web design, you're going to get a site that's going to be like, boom, 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 let's put these cool angled layouts between them. And you're like, man, how am I going to do that? So clip path property replaced the depreciated clip property, which wasn't really supported that well and had some bugs anyway. So our main concepts here, we can clip with an image or an SVG, and I totally stole this from somewhere. I didn't create this awesome geometric pattern here. So we have our object, we've got an SVG clip path, we apply it, we get that cool guy over there. So here's our markup to represent that. We've got our image container. We've got our image, which is obviously a lost album cover from the band Yes, because I mean, did you see that thing? Like, what? So just a little basic markup here. You know, we're displaying something flex. I want it to all center in the middle, and then, you know, I don't want it to get too big. And then we've got our image down here below. So I would just apply that clip path with a, you know, just like you're including a image inline. You may be asking what this is, so, you know, I definitely encourage you, if you've got a bunch of SVGs, wrap them all up in a sprite and reference, you know, there, because then you're just loading one image and then you're just referencing that, you know, target to that part of the combined SVG. Clip with box values. These are all just regular out of the box. You got your fill box, stroke box, view box, margin box, border box, padding box, content box. You can also clip with a geometric value. So this is another cool example that I totally stole from, I think it's MDN maybe. So they did that really cool thing. I don't know if you noticed that, you know, the image is way over here, but I mean, that is really cool. You're wrapping around a, you know, circle, half circle there. Clip path, we have a circle. We're doing 70% at the start, 0, 50% to the bottom. So this is another website that we just launched recently, and I got the design and I was like, oh, angled. All right, let's see how we're going to tackle this one. So what I approached originally was creating a polygon. These are not the actual values. I totally just copied this out, but this is the top left corner, top right corner, bottom right corner, bottom left corner. So I'm just telling it what bounding box area am I creating. Holy crap, what did I do? Yeah, I was like, totally wrote it all out, and I was like, yeah, this is going to be perfect. And then it refreshed, and I was like, oh my God, maybe I need to reconsider what I'm doing for a living right now. You know, maybe I'll be a farmer or something like that. So just keep in mind, this is some crazy shit may happen when you're doing this, and you know, you just got to kind of mess with your values and inspector, and you'll get there. Say we want to inset our clip path, we can totally do that as well by a couple pixels. We can clip with a box and a geometric value combined. So say we want to do the stroke box, but also a circle. We can totally do that, just chaining that together. You can do a fill box as well as a polygon, keeping it within a bounding box area. And we have our global values, which are pretty much applied to any of these rules: inherit, initial, and unset if you don't want something that's cascading in. So let's see, we're at about 88% global and 60% unprefixed. I'd be careful with this because you see Edge and IE both don't have support for it right now, which is kind of crazy to me that the Edge guys are shipping stuff like Position Sticky and don't have support for this. So just keep that in mind. No Edge or IE support may be a blocker for some of your browser stacks. Other than a custom image, like if you're actually going to replace whatever you're masking with an image, if there's no pattern or if there is a pattern or something like that, there's not really a fallback or a polyfill for this. Application on a large scale, you're clipping a ton of stuff on a page, you may actually see some performance impacts because the paint's going to have to calculate all of that each time, and just be careful there. Using production, I'd say yes, only if your fallback isn't overly large. Like if your fallback is creating this JPEG or this transparent PNG that's like this big and like this big and like 600K, no, don't do that. It's not even worth it. Go back to your designer and talk to them and work out a compromise at that point. Solid color, simple geometric clips can fall back really quickly with an inline SVG. So you could create an SVG that's really tiny and then tell it to scale up to whatever size you need. You've got a huge file savings at that point. That's exactly what I did here. I had support for, and I used supports to say if you can support it and clip it at this value, go for it. Otherwise, I created a little bitty triangle, an SVG, and I just told it to scale to that max bounding box that I had here, and it totally worked. Now, if that would have had a pattern or something in it, then no go at that point. Wrapping shape outside. So remember that cupcake example that we saw a minute ago? This would allow you to define a shape around which inline content should wrap. Use it with floats. By default, an inline content wraps around its margin box. This totally adds a nice touch to custom things like blog author avatars if they're circle, thumbnails on a card listing, or coupled with an initial letter, some cool custom drop caps to something. So here's our concepts for wrapping outside, and you can see that it wraps the text around whatever the edge that we're giving it here. So here's our shape outside and our clip path together, and it creates that magic. We've got different ways that, the pretty standard content border, padding, all of those. You can wrap on a global value as well. So I could say use the initial, inherit, or unset if I needed to. Man, our browser support's not really there. Like, here's these guys just hanging out over here, and Firefox is like, I'm not doing that. What are you talking about, man? 59? No way. But it says it's in development, so they said they're working on it. And Edge status, they're considering it. So I don't know on this one really. Maybe a blocker. So like I said, other than the custom image, there's not really much of a fallback. If your fallback's not overly large, same rules apply. It's not really worth it at that point, and you could use the same thing with an inline SVG that scales. Drop cap initial letter is something I just talked about. And I'm sure you guys have seen a drop cap in like old text. It's really, really big back in the day. Property that selects the first letter of an element and then specifies the number of lines that element's going to take up. It can support dropped, raised, or sunken initial letters. So this is that Jaws of Life website. And just to set off the text a little bit better here, we had a drop cap that took up 3 lines. So because the support really wasn't there, I had to create this with first letter and then give it a margin, a negative margin, and a really low line height so that it would push down and not affect the rest of the text there. But it'd be great if we didn't have to do that stuff. So drop caps allow us to create that by saying first letter, take 3 lines of the text for the initial letter there. I could also say take 3.5 lines for that, and it would drop down, right in the middle of the baseline of that. You could even say sync it by 2 lines by adding another property to the edge there, You can measure it with global values, of course, our initial, inherit, and unset. Whoa, man, what is going on? That's a lot of red. So right now, Safari is really the only browser that supports this, both iOS and desktop. Firefox in development, Edge, we're thinking about it. Firefox status in development, I don't know why that's there twice, that's weird. There's 2 Firefoxes, you guys know that? Yeah. So right now, I don't really know if this is good for production. I'd say yes, but you're gonna have to use fallbacks. This may be one of those things where you're approaching your stack and your CSS to future-proof things, and you like to delete code, 6 months from now. I love to do that, so I'll bloat something up now just to reduce it later on, because I love to give that functionality to browsers that support it when they can. Hopeful for Chrome. Great ongoing conversation about this on the W3C page. A lot of, I don't want to call them arguments, but lively discussions between developers at that point. Multi-columns. Multi-column is a layout spec that allows easy definition of multiple columns of text, just like in newspapers. The content flows between subsequent columns as the width and height of the parent is adjusted. Really cool website that we made for a Tile Council of North America called whytile.com. It really showed you information about why tile is the best choice for your home, from cost to effectiveness. Cost and health concerns and all that. But they had a big chunk of content that was like I don't know what you call this, like an index or something like that. And so I was like, wow, I can't put all that in one long row. This page is going to be endless scrolling. So, and you can see my markup here. It's a bunch of paragraphs because this is all CMS created content. So with column count, I could tell it break into 2 columns, give it a gap. Well, we'll get into gap here in a second. Give it a gap between those columns of 40 pixels. I didn't apply a rule to this, but you could give it a column rule and it'll wrap it in a border. You can tell it to span 3 columns, or I'm sorry, have 3 columns, but the initial one span 2 columns of that. And I can specify width, which I did for this example. And a couple helpful tips: use these 2 properties as well if you're doing anything that's flowing. Page break inside a void is going to prevent like a paragraph from getting cut and half of it be at the bottom of one column and the other half at the top. Same thing with break inside. You don't want to break a word or a sentence. You want it to be able to be readable. So both of those rules keep the content within the column even if it's going to split. This is almost totally evergreen. I mean, that's probably just a little bitty obscure bug right there. So you could totally ship this in production. There's some issues, but they're really, really obscure. In Firefox, the property column span does not yet work. Okay, so that's maybe a bigger one. Should have picked a better one. But just keep that in mind. Always look back at your issues if you're running into bugs. Backdrop filter. This is included as part of the CSS filter spec. Similar to the filter property, inherits all the filtering functions such as grayscale, blur, sepia. I don't know why anybody would use sepia for anything anymore. Applies the effects to the elements underneath the selected element. Therefore, to see the effect, you must make the element or its background at least partially transparent. So here's a great example from somebody's code pen. I think that's maybe Zelda or somebody behind it. But they're applying, like a mask or a filter here, and you can see they've kept it a little bit transparent. They can also do this where they blur behind it. Previously, that was grayscale. I'm sure you've seen this on Instagram. Totally, you can see you can kind of get a little bit of the idea of what the image is behind it. As well as Medium. Medium does this as they load in their big hero images. We can filter with values here and a little bit of markup here. I've just created a little basic example. Got a thumbnail, a button sitting on top of it, and a little message within that span. So, button, and then we're going to do our card thumbnail. I've got my background image, which is that eagle attacking Trump when he was sitting at his desk that time. I'm sure you guys remember that. It was the most awesome thing on the internet ever. And then background size cover, so I'm stretching that image across the entire background. I've got my button here where I'm positioning it in the middle, and width 50%, height 25%. And then I'm telling it what's underneath it, blur it by 4 pixels. So, well, this would respond. So essentially you would get this, where underneath it, it's blurred. You could also do brightness, contrast, you can do a drop shadow, grayscale, hue, rotate. I don't even know what that is. Invert the color, that'd be really, really hideous. Don't ever do that. Opacity, sepia, again, why would anybody ever make anything sepia these days? Saturate the color by 80% if you needed. You can also filter with an image or an SVG, where I could just pass in again a sprite of an eagle calling out like this, and then just mask that out. Global values, again, that just applies to any of those. Inherit, initial, and unset if we don't need it. What's our support level? Wow. Again, Safari comes out on top there. So you can see there's really no support in any of these other browsers or any of it. Let's see, we've got under consideration for Edge, proposed for Chrome, and under consideration for Firefox. So again, that'll probably never happen at this point. Maybe, no, I don't want to give them too much grief. These guys have been really good in supporting stuff and really pushing out new features pretty quickly. Couple issues there. Using production, yeah, I'd say go for it if it's not crucial that you don't have a fallback. If this is a nice enhancement to something, go for it. Low current browser support could really be a blocker for some stacks. Man, this thing is not responding, sorry. There's no information yet on performance, but I can't think that there is much because you're going to be using your graphics card to apply these, probably very low. On the same token, let's talk about background blend modes. A lot of it's still like the same application. Describes how the element's background images blend with each other and the element's background color. Should be defined in the same order as the background image CSS property because you're applying, say you've got multiple background images, you want to apply those rules to the order that you're specifying. This is going to be excellent for background images effects. Keyword values, you do cool stuff like this, where I've got a nice image and I'm applying a nice blue hue to it or a cool rainbow. So here's our markup as the previous, and equal text trump again. So I'm going to tell it to multiply or screen or overlay or any of those cool things that Photoshop does that then you don't get it. The layer's not, locked in, and then your designer gives it to you and you're like, oh dude, I can't support that. Well, pretty soon you can support that. Darken, lighten, color dodge, burn, hard light, soft light. It tries to mimic all of those filters that Photoshop and other programs give you. There's a lot of them. Global values, again, initial, inherit, or inset if you don't need it. And CSS Blender is a really cool website that you can put a photo in there or an image, and it gives you examples of what all of them look like, so you don't have to sit there and say, let's try difference. Oh, that looks like shit. Let's try darken. Oh, nope, don't see that. Hue. Ugh. So you could actually pick out, or at least show somebody, a designer or somebody, yeah, this isn't really going to work out, or is there an alternate that we can try to propose? Our support level, again, our friends over here at Microsoft are really helping us out. Pretty evergreen for the other browsers. Using production, yeah, go for it. Again, if it's not crucial to not have a fallback, if this is just an enhancement that you're doing, I'd say go for it. Again, no browser support for Edge or IE, so just keep that in mind. And no information yet on performance. Variables, let's get into that. Entities defined by authors, which contain specific values to be reused throughout a document. Intended to replace variables provided by CSS pre and post processors like Sass, Less, or PostCSS. So this is markup in the code collection for Jaws of Life, and we usually use an inverted triangle CSS pattern here, and we have a folder called settings where we're breaking out a lot of variables into specific concern stacks. So we usually will name all of our colors and then try to get into, if there's variations of that, we just break it out. Same thing with our breakpoints for media queries and fonts. And then you can see I've got variable set right here, then I'm referencing that variable, and this is specifically Sass. And then I'm referencing these variables down here. They do stay static between style sheets. You can set up a Sass variable to be mutable, but it's a little bit of rigmarole to get through that, so I usually don't do that. So to replace that with a CSS variable by core, you would just define kind of the same pattern, just a little bit of different markup. You would define the variable here on the root object, and then you would just reference it with the var syntax wherever you're applying it. Pretty good support here, if we just ignore that guy right there, Edge is shipping it, iOS Safari, even Opera, which sometimes gets a little bit weird there, is totally shipping this. So to use it in production, I say, yeah, go for it. But keep that in mind if you're used to using Sass variables or Less variables, is that you get a benefit from this. I don't really see much of like a browser or performance benefit. More so, you're trying to eliminate that step of post-processing or pre-processing out of your stack. any use of variables, whether it's Sass or less, or you're using a regular CSS variables, will totally dry out your style sheets because you're not repeating a bunch of stuff all over the place, and organization is key there. This is absolutely essential for any component or module-based systems because you want anything that you define that's going to cascade to all of those modules to be pretty maintainable, and a variable is totally your friend at that point. So that really does it for our modern CSS topics tonight. So let's get into HTML5 APIs. Intersection observer, resize, mutation, performance. We'll talk about the fetch API, push API, payment handlers, and our PWA interests. Start with intersection observer. Provides a way to asynchronously observe changes in the intersection of a target element with an ancestor element or a top-level document. So basically that's just saying keep up with where it's at in the viewport as you scroll, or as your viewport changes. Eliminates the required use of expensive event handlers and loops, calling expensive methods like element get bounding client rectangle to build up the needed information for every single element that you're doing. And this is pretty big stuff in front end. Like, you're not really going to build a website these days that's not going to have something sticky, or probably is going to have a sub-nav that's going to stick at the top at a certain point. So here's another video. This is Green Fiber, local company that produces cellulose insulation. And we totally had a sticky header up here that remained fixed all the time, but as it scrolled, we needed to make sure that this remained fixed when it got to the top. So as you can see, it pushes the header out of the way, and then it stays up there. And as we come back, pretty standard functionality for websites these days. So how I had to approach this, oh my God. I had a load of library here called Scroll Magic, which helped me keep up with, bounding box and where I'm at on the viewport. You got to set up a bunch of constants here, keeping up with the height of the container, the height of the header, the height of the subnavs. Is it offset? Is it going to be the first one? Then we got to do a bunch of rigmarole here where I'm looking for each of the subnavs and I'm figuring out, are you sticky yet? When do you become sticky? What rules do I apply at that point? Then I got to have a function here to move that header out of the way at the same, proportional to how my scroll of the subnav is coming up. So you just see now I'm down to like 100 lines of JavaScript, and then I've had to add these event listeners on load because I want it to happen then. What if you've loaded to an anchor point and you're below that point and I need it to be sticky? And if you scroll, I need you to start acting. But man, then I've got this really expensive thing here because I couldn't throttle it because I needed to know exactly pixel level and I couldn't wait. So yeah, this is kind of an expensive thing going on here. So with the intersection observer, this pretty much eliminates a ton of that code. So you would set up an object here with your options. You tell it the root document that I'm listening for. So this is the area that I'm concerned for whatever element I'm listening to. What area is it scrolling in? Usually that's going to be like your viewport, essentially. Do I want to apply any type of margin offset to it? Say, this thing has, you've got a sticky header at the top, but the body's padded by whatever the height of that is. So I want it to start listening whenever it's reaching within that threshold. So I could offset it by 25 pixels or something like that. You could also tell it to change the threshold to a little bit less or more. And then you just start a new observer. And then you create a target element. So this is actually the element that's going to be scrolling. So that would be like the subnav, and then this would be the body or the viewport area that I'm listening to. And then just kick it off by saying, just observe the target at that point. And we've got decent support here. I mean, Safari, that's kind of bad news right there too. We can kind of ignore that. So using production now, I say yes, but you can see I had 110 lines of code before to do the fallback there. So just keep that in mind that only adds like maybe 10 extra lines of code for browsers that are going to support this. And you're going to get big performance gains from using this versus all of that contrived stuff, man. All of that's really expensive. So again, performance gains are great over the alternate solutions. Resize observer. So this is another observer that's going to really save us a lot of grief. So allow you to notify when an element's content rectangle has changed from its size and react accordingly. we all have to have event listeners for window resize because we want stuff to happen, and maybe we need to trigger, a breakpoint thing or something like that. So this eliminates all of that required attachment of a listener to the resize event on the document. You can be notified of a change of the viewport's dimension and then trigger changes of that child element. All of that's very expensive right now. So here I've done this again, and here's my resize event that I'm listening to. And I've got 3 different things going on here where I'm saying, run this scene first, run this one, and run this one. But again, I'm listening on every single resize function. And that, you could throttle that, but so really to set this off, you would just create a new object. You create your entries, and this is just going to loop through anything that, I'm saying, go ahead and listen for a resize event on. So that's my loop here. And this is going to give me just like the content rectangle. There's a bunch of different properties, and then I just want to write some of this stuff out to the console just to make sure that we're getting what we need. So I could do the width or the height of that padding at that point. So then you just kick off the observer again by just kicking it off and saying, hey, observe this element and tell me when things change. But whoa, oh my God, holy crap! So why am I even talking about this right now? I mean, good Lord, that's a lot of red. No, do not use in production yet. No Evergreen browsers support it, but keep this in your back pocket because the performance gains you're going to get from this in the future is immense over just listening for the whole window resize. Mutation observer. So I'm sure you're familiar with the mutation event. This is going to expose a callback function that can be delivered after multiple changes. So say we change an attribute value, add an attribute, delete one. Child node of that element could change, and we need to know that at the parent level. A lot of that from a DOM node removed or a DOM attribute modified, those are pretty expensive and a little bit buggy events, so this totally replaces that. It's been evergreen since 2013, but I think just with performance being at the top of concerns lately, it's kind of getting a little bit more attention. So we would just create our new observer, just loop through. I'm just going to, just write out a console log just to make sure that we're getting what type of mutation event that we're happening there, whether, class name change or something like that. And then we want to grab, our attributes, our child list, our character data, all of that. I want all of that from the event. And then we want to tell it what node am I concerning this on. So of course that's going to be the body because, I'm concerned about changes at this point. And then just kick off your observer and tell it what target node are you listening for changes on, and then here's my config. And again, this is pretty evergreen since 2013. I mean, you can see we go all the way back to Chrome 49, so go for it these days if you need that. Performance observer, as progressive web apps become more and more popular, performance is super important at that level. So this provides an interface to browsers to get low-level access to timing data. This can expose that data to third-party performance analysis and visualization tools and offline and custom performance analysis. And it asynchronously gathers all the information from the browser and prefers to dispatch all of that information during idle time. So again, performance, why would it not? It's called the performance observer. So pretty easy to kick off. You just give it the list and the observer that you need to listen for and create it with that, and then you just kick off a new, like say we're just measuring this event right now. And again, this is pretty evergreen as well. We're already back to Chrome 49. So I'd say use this now too. Fetch API. We've all used Ajax. If you haven't, then you really need to look into that. So this is going to provide a drop-in replacement for XML HTTP request, generic definition of request and response objects, and a lot of other stuff that's involved in network requests. And this allows it to be used in the future whether it's a service worker, which is a big thing with progressive web apps, if it's the cache API or something like that, or anything really that needs to modify and handle any type of network request. And a bonus, the API is totally promise-based, so you don't get into that callback hell of non-promise-based JavaScript. Don't look at that, but I think we could probably ship this today if you're dropping IE11 support. Just keep that in mind. payment handler and request APIs. So taking payments online is all the hell over the place. You got super big security concerns. There's like 10 different network providers you have to work with in this stuff, and it's a big headache. So this is going to provide a standard way to initiate payment requests from web pages and applications. Any user agents implementing the API will prompt the user which way they want to handle the request, and then it returns that information to the site. And this is going to define capabilities that enable web applications to handle payment requests. So this is going to help move web payments and e-commerce a little bit more forward and kind of get away from the expensive, and I say expensive from cost of it. But again, friends over at Firefox are like, hey, bug off, we're not dealing with that anytime soon. Bob's on vacation and he didn't come back, so that's his concern. So do we ship that now? I don't know. Keep this in your back pocket and start looking into this stuff, because I think in the next 2 years this is probably going to be the de facto for e-commerce. Push API. So some of us love push notifications, some of us hate push notifications. I kind of like them because I don't really want to open apps all the time to get information, and I like to be able to just pick up my phone and see news or whatever is coming over the channel there. But we've never really had that ability. Well, we kind of have had that ability in web applications, but it's been really contrived and just a headache to deal with. So this is going to totally standardize that and give you the ability to push messages from the server, whether the web app's in the foreground or even currently loaded, which is pretty cool. This asynchronously is going to give notifications and let them opt into stuff, so you can start engaging people with timely content if they're opting in for it. Again, browser support, Edge is not there yet, but do they talk about that? Yep, so we're in development. We even have a link, so they actually have an article about their progress, which is very promising. No support for Safari. I'm not even sure what TP means in that, but we're getting there. So that's another one to kind of keep in your back pocket for the future. So let's talk about progressive web apps. Anybody built progressive web app? Awesome. Yeah, cool. Awesome. That's great to hear. So there's a ton of these new APIs that are out that are really going to help bridge the gap and kind of bring a little bit more parity between a native application and all the cool stuff that it can connect to with hardware, and allow us to actually do that with a web application. And so we have cool stuff like vibration API, screen orientation to see which way you're pointing, page transition, which is in an app you always have that feel between, you're not really going between sections. It's actually just the smooth transition between content. We can do that now. Page visibility to be able to offload stuff if you're not actually active at the moment, do garbage collection, things like that. Full screen API and web Bluetooth API, which is going to be incredible when it comes out. So what is a progressive web app? So this is what Google really defines a progressive web app as. It's reliable. It loads instantly. It's never going to show the little dinosaur, even in uncertain network conditions. And the way that they push that, they say you're reading something, you're on the subway, but you go in a tunnel and you're going to lose connection. So what happens at that point? Close the app out and then you lose potentially a conversion. Fast. It has to respond quickly to user interactions because as a native application, that's their whole catch. Like, it really feels like you're immersed in this experience here. So you don't want any jank. Everything, all the animations have to be perfectly smooth. It's got to feel good. And it's got to feel like a natural app on the device, because that's really what we're trying to get to, is to get somebody to go to a website instead of downloading an application. So what does reliable mean? We launched from the user's home screen, Service Worker, which is a cool little block of JavaScript that can communicate back and forth, kind of like a little shuttle. Enables a progressive web app to load instantly regardless of the network state. Written in JavaScript, it's like a client-side proxy and puts you in control of the cache. So you just kind of tell it, I want to pre-cache these static elements. Maybe you want to pre-cache a little bit of data down to a database level that you can reference at that point. All of that stuff just provides, the ability to still have that experience if you lose connection or if your connection is kind of spotty at that point. Fast. Super big. 53% of users will abandon a site if it takes more than 3 seconds to load. I'm a little bit more patient than that, but that's because this is my bread and butter. So Once loaded, users expect them to be fast. Again, no janky scrolling, no slow to respond interfaces. And engaging, they have to be installable and live on a user's home screen, which is pretty cool because again, that's, you want people to be quickly go into that experience. No need for an app store. They offer an immersive full screen experience. It's help from a manifest file. It can engage users with a push notification. The manifest controls how your app appears. You can put in there specific icons that'll show for your home screen, name, any information like that. Things to show when the app is loading or if it doesn't have a connection at the moment. You can totally take off the browser Chrome. You can force an orientation if you needed to. So some of the APIs that are going to help us achieve this parity is things like the vibration API. So, you always get little vibration alerts. I have mine on my iPhone set up for every single notification with a special chirp. So feel it in my pocket, I know that's a text message. If it's something else, I've got a calendar invite or something. So how cool would it be if a website can actually do that, causing the device to buzz or do something like that. This API offers web apps the ability to access this hardware. So you could tie that in with UI, button clicks or something like that. That would get really annoying. Don't go crazy with this, Somebody's going to delete that off the home screen really quickly. But so where we're at right now, these aren't as much of a concern because we're talking about a progressive web app here. So yeah, somebody might be looking at this on a Surface, and you got to kind of keep that in mind. But really what we're focused on is iOS, Safari, and Chrome. So we're not quite there yet with Safari. It looks like they're working on it. Oh wait, it's removed, so that's not good. I didn't even notice that before. I may not even have this section in here. So there may be something different that WebKit's working on, or maybe there's some type of security issue there. Just keep it in mind. Screen orientation API, ability to read the screen orientation type and angle, be able to tell if something changes. So we're not listening for these crazy JavaScript events like, is my viewport this? Is my viewport that? Oh my God, what's happened? We're pretty close there. I mean, Edge is pretty good. Again, Safari, what are they doing, man? God, these guys, they want us all to go to the App Store for everything from now on. So page transition API. So again, like I talked about, you want any change within content that you're going in here. If it's a progressive web app, it has to feel like you're in an app. So we can kind of do this nowadays with crazy stuff like push state and history APIs. Man, a lot of that, it's so much code. You're thinking, man, am I actually impacting performance at this point? I do not want that to happen. Huh. Never even seen that. So let's get over here.
Sorry, I clicked the button.
God, Alex, what are you doing, man? Crap, I can't even get over here to turn it off. All right, bear with me here for a moment. Sweet. All right, thanks, Alex. Woohoo! All right, so again, Safari, who the hell knows what they're doing here? Oh wait, I think we went back too far. Yeah, sorry. There we go. So we're pretty evergreen. As you see, Safari supporting it, iOS and Chrome. So we're good to go. So we could totally use this right now. Page visibility API. This is going to tell you whether it's visible or if it's in focus. Particularly useful for saving resources. You can dump stuff like garbage collection or just low-level tasks to the time when it's actually not in focus or not visible. Again, low-level tasks, garbage collection, etc. This is pretty evergreen as well, so I think we could totally use this today. There's a couple, or actually just one known. 38, the desktop, the visibility change event is fired twice, so that could probably drive you crazy if Friday when you have to ship, and you're like, what the hell is going on here? Oh my God. So always look back to your issues. Full screen API, so this is going to allow us to take up and eliminate all the browser Chrome and give you that full app experience as well. Any children, it's going to occupy, it's going to eliminate any of the browser interface and other applications from the screen for that duration. There's some issues. We're not quite evergreen here. Actually, Firefox has a bunch of different issues. So I would just be careful, using this, but it looks like you're good to go. Support stacking. Safari does not support stacking, meaning only one element can be set to full screen. Like, okay, cool. Bluetooth API. So this is probably my favorite thing that literally has like zero support. And I was like, man, if I could ever just get a hold of that Bluetooth stuff, just imagine all the stuff that you could do, proximity-based things. Just, it's endless almost. But as a security feature, discovering Bluetooth devices must be triggered by user gestures such as a touch or a mouse click. So you may be able to use something like, a push state or a push message and say, hey, we can actually enhance your visit here to Ray Ward if you let us connect to your Bluetooth. Oh, it also requires HTTPS and TLS. So make sure that you should be using SSLs now just in production just all the time. But if you're not, you need to do that. But as you can see, man, we're not looking too hot here. Chrome's good to go there, but Safari, currently support varies by OS. Some of it's experimental. WebKit status, not even considering it. So again, this could be just one of those things that if you have the time and you're not worried about the bloat, you can add enhancements for browsers that support it. Not, whatever. So let's get into some of the future stuff that really is not supported these days, but is going to be incredibly awesome whenever it comes out. We're going to talk about the CSS working group and some of the stages that they go through. We'll talk about font display, position sticky, which I mentioned earlier, matches and not selectors, element queries, which are pretty hot right now, object fit and object position, image set, which allows us to do exactly the same thing as a HTML responsive image set in CSS, which is pretty cool for a background image. Media query ranges, allowing expansion of what a media query is now. Color mods and gray functions. And nesting and when else rules, which are things that Sass and Less give you out of the box, and really kind of got my love for Sass and pre-processing started. So let's review what the CSS working group is. So created by the World Wide Web Consortium, W3C, in '97 to tackle all of these crazy browser prefixes. Oh my God. So if you remember back then, if anybody was in the web at that time, I literally probably built my first website, was probably a sophomore at UNCG at that point, and I was like, oh my God, what is this web thing? This is gonna change. I was doing like independent publishing at that time. And I was like, this is going to change the world. I know it is. So I built my first one at that point. And as that next 20 years, this is why I turned gray up here, dealing with all of these crazy browsers that did all kinds of stuff. And if you were around in the, say, like late 90s, early 2000s, man, it was all over the place. Like browser prefixes were like, they'd conflict with each other. Some of them like canceled each other out. It was this crazy mess. So they were like, hey, we got to standardize this stuff. Let's get some of the experts together and let's make this stuff work a little bit better and be more condensed. So right now there's 125 members in it. It's really like who's who of our leaders in our industry. Adopts a significant role in the W3C project of developing web standards. And really this is how web standards started. So they go through a staging process. It's 5 levels, and it sometimes takes a couple years to get through that because they're really going to try to run this through every single person. What is your thoughts? What do you see as drawbacks to this? They're going to go through creation of standards, testing, feedback, use cases. They're going to make sure this is right before it gets out there because back in the day, somebody at Microsoft is like, yeah, we support that. Just throw it in there. Just put MS ... whatever. Firefox is like, shoot, we'd do that too, man. Just put Firefox, whatever. Then we got into that mess. So this is what we're trying to eliminate. So the staging process currently reflects the real life stability of the CSS properties. Our first stage is 0, totally aspirational. This is like somebody saying, hey, I think things should start this way. An editor's draft championed by a non-CSS working group member, highly unstable. And a champion is the person that's totally responsible for being the advocate for that and doing the legwork necessary to bring it up to concerned parties and creating the draft and making sure that it's championed all the way up the chain there. So our next stage is our stage 1. It's pretty enthusiastic. You've got some buy-in from some other people. They're kind of thinking this might be a pretty good idea at this point. Experimental, everybody's saying, yeah, we're definitely going to do this, but man, we got some work to do. We got to make sure we work out all the bugs, any conflicts with other stuff, and how is this going to work moving forward. Stage 3, totally allowable. We could probably start working this into browsers at this point. It's pretty much considered stable. Not much is going to change at that point, but we still could have a rejection. Totally embraced, stage 4. This may be behind like an experimental flag or something like that, but you could probably start shipping this stuff to production at this point. And the recognized browser vendors, Apple, Google, Microsoft, Mozilla, and Opera. That's the people that really have a say-so in this. And our stage 5, that means that it's out there, it's shipped, it's standard, and everybody should be using it and loving it and making cool presentations. Oh, rejected. So this was a really bad idea. Like, Bob, why did you come up with this? We're rejecting it, stage X. Done. So some of the new stuff, we've got font display currently in stage 4. It's going to determine how and when a font is downloaded and whether you're going to use it or not. So the timeline is divided into 3 periods, which dictate the rendering behavior. You've got a font block period. That's when it's trying to download. It may actually use it, but it's going to render an invisible fallback at that point. The swap period means that we've got the font, we've downloaded it, but we need to swap out whatever fallback we had in place. And failure means, oh man, we weren't able to download it, or perhaps we've got this hooked into a performance observer and we're saying this font package is taking too long to download. It's going to impact the performance, and I don't want that flash of unstyled content. So load in just a sans serif or something like that. So our topics here, we have the auto, which is the font display strategy defined by the user agent. We can do it a block, which gives it a short block period and infinite swap period. Swap period means that it's not going to have a block period and it's instantly going to try to load. The fallback is it's going to be a very small block period and a short swap period. And the optional gives it an extremely small block period and no swap. So this is kind of like, if you can download this and it's within a performance range that I'm looking for, use the font. If not, then go back to my fallback. We're not too evergreen here. So Chrome, definitely on top of things here. Looks like Firefox is almost there. Not really sure what Edge is doing. Of course, just forget about those guys. And iOS looks like, see if there's an issue. So no issue. So I'm not sure what Safari's doing with that. So just, a lot of this too, just keep in mind, this is in the next 2 years or so, maybe the next year. Position sticky, we're at stage 4 with that. Acts similar to relative position. It doesn't remove anything from the document flow like a position fixed would, but a sticky element has no effect on the position of the adjacent elements, and it doesn't collapse into its parent elements. So it's similar to position fixed, except that an element with position sticky behaves like position relative within its parent until it's given a threshold that's met in the viewport, and then it becomes sticky. So again, we could totally solve this without all of that rigmarole that we had. I could just say, hey, I'm going to have an intersection observer. When my listening period here, and I'm reaching the top, go ahead and make that position sticky. And we've solved that issue that was like 100 lines of code in maybe like 15 at this point. Plus, we don't have a ton of different, like all these other event handlers and event listeners happening, so we've got tremendous performance gains at this point. Edge, we're there, and we're pretty green across the board. And if you just forget about our old friend IE11 there, then I'd say you could probably ship this in production right now. That's a crazy one. Chrome, Firefox, and Safari do not appear to support sticky table headers. What? Okay. Matches and not selectors. I'm sure everybody's probably used a not selector, but a matches, man, that would be super cool if we could block that in as well. It's at stage 5 right now. Functional pseudo class by the official CSS4 specs. Really doesn't serve any purpose other than making complex selectors lighter. It's kind of like syntactic sugar for this. Keeps you away from repeating the compound selector where there is only one item that varies. Element queries, we're pretty new in this. It's kind of a new concept. It's like a media query, except that the rule applies to the properties of the actual element instead of the browser's viewport. It covers instances where a viewport window may change, but you're not actually reaching a point to where it's going to impact one of those elements. So I could listen for that and then make changes based on the window changing, even though I'm not actually hitting the corners of something or a bounding box. So this would allow, whoops, I think I missed a slide there. Object fit and object position. So if you're familiar with using background cover or things like that when you're using a CSS background image, how awesome would that be to be able to apply those same rules to an actual inline image or a video? Because trying to size that and put it in a container, it's kind of a pain. So this would totally mirror the background size property. And object position was used in conjunction with object fit and tells it how to position within the container as you size it. So a good example of this, we've got an image container, we've got an image which is the free big green egg for everybody in attendance. God, that'd be awesome. I'm a big smoke, grill guy, so that's like a dream of mine. So we would just tell the object inside, or the image inside of the container to fill, and it's going to do exactly like CSS background images do. It's going to go all the way to the edge and all the way to the top, and then if the aspect ratio needs to increase outside of the bounding box and clip that out, it'll do that. You can also say it, tell it to contain within the container, cover it, scale down, which means it's going to keep its aspect ratio correct, or just don't do anything with it. I don't know why you would do that, I guess just to override. Image set. So like I said earlier, I'm sure you guys, if you're anybody using responsive images in production today, you're the man. I just got to say, this guy over here, man, he's on top of stuff. So this property will totally mimic what a HTML image set does, and you can use it within CSS for like a background image or something like that. Allows download of the optimal size image format, but not just size. We keep in mind that we could use things like Retina, scale, stuff like that. So this is kind of what it looks like, and I know it's a lot of markup, I know it's crazy, but again, we've got to support these browser prefixes right now. So I would just say at 1x, download this, but if you can support and you're on Retina and you can just, handle that 2x image, go ahead and download that one as well. So a media query range. So this allows us to define ranges using ordinary mathematical comparison operators. You can kind of do this now, but you got to chain together like max width this and min width this, and you got to work within that. So how awesome would it be if we can do cool stuff like this, where I could say, create my media query, but arrange it between, it has to be minimum of 480 and a maximum of 768. So we're not really doing anything new in terms of functionality. We're just kind of drying this up and making it a little bit cleaner to look at. So color mod and gray. So again, these are getting more into the art direction stuff of CSS. Allows us to fully desaturate colors or modify color if needed. So we could just apply things like desaturate this with a gray, or make this an alpha channel and change the black alpha channel to 50% here. Nesting and when else rules. So again, I go back to Sass and using a preprocessor. It allows you to, and you've seen that in my code examples, you just nest stuff in and things start cascading. But again, you got to use a preprocessor to do that stuff. So with the nesting, which is at stage 1 right now, you can do this within CSS and not have to handle it with a preprocessor. Increases modularity and maintainability of the style sheets, and it's kind of good to look at. You can kind of see how the cascade affects. And again, it's intended to replace the nesting features in Sass. So essentially you would just do, here's your parent, here's my child, I'm just nesting that inside. The syntax looks exactly the same as what it does in Sass. If else rules, that's another really cool thing that a preprocessor like Sass or Less provides you. A little bit of programming within CSS. Apply arbitrary rules if something supports, or a disparate condition rules are applied. And it's intended to replace the syntaxes that are in preprocessors right now. So I could say, when I support display grid, do this. If I don't, then do this. So it's just kind of a cleaner, more of a familiar pattern to doing conditional-based stuff. So our wrap up, I've put a ton of links on this URL right here. It's basically everything that was in my bookmarks file, so don't get scared when you look at it and it scrolls endlessly, because I have a big bookmark problem. But at the top, there's a ton of resources, all dealing with everything that I've talked about tonight. Do we have any questions? And before we start that, for the best question tonight, and everybody knows that web developers in 2017 love stickers, and I love to tell people, put a sticker on your laptop, you're instantly an expert in that. So the best question that I deem tonight, yep, gets a pack of Wes Boss stickers. If anybody's familiar with Wes, he does super awesome online training. He's just a great guy altogether, and he makes really cool stickers, but he does limited runs of them. And I was able to grab a couple packs of the last run, and there's some cool stuff in here. So does anybody have any questions? Nobody has any questions? Nobody wants the stickers? Katie.
Didn't really go into much of the new JavaScript stuff that's coming out. Is there anything that you're looking forward to in that realm?
Well, we've been doing ES6 here for over a year, and I come from a full jQuery background, so I have done some JavaScript like way early in my career before things like jQuery came around, and so I was really intimidated by ES6 at first, and actually listened to Wes Boss's JavaScript training thing, and I mean, it all clicks. It really helps you speed up your coding, doing stuff like inline string substitutions and array from and stuff like that. I would say that's the stuff that I'm most excited about, is seeing other developers move away from things like jQuery or packages like that, and really exploring what core JavaScript offers these days. So I think ES6 just helps move that in the right direction. Anybody else? Yeah, go for it.
How will permissions work with progressive web apps?
That's a big thing. So, and what type of permission would you be thinking? Like maybe.
So like for Bluetooth.
So that was one of the things that I noted in there. It had the security protocol says that the user has to agree to allow. You can't just go out and say, I'm going to connect to every Bluetooth device in the world. Bluetooth has the low-level security things built into it like that. So any type of interaction will have to respect those rules. But right now, I don't know how promising Web Bluetooth API is. Like, I was really excited about it last year, but then seeing that it's not getting embraced as much by the browsers kind of bums me out a little bit. But yeah. Anything else? Yeah, go for it.
In terms of security, what about something like full screen API? Could an app say, oh, well, I'll just grab the full screen, pretend I crashed, draw a line saying, oops, I crashed, and then mock up your desktop or something?
I mean, that's a concern. I don't think that something like full screen API would have concern or security stuff like that built in. I don't really know how you would approach that. I don't think there's really any standards or rules in place for avoiding things like that. Probably would just, I don't even know, man. You would just.
They really haven't talked about it.
They haven't really talked about it because with an app, you could totally report that this app's doing something, but out here we're just there's nobody that's going to be monitoring every progressive web app in the world. So that may be just something that the community polices that a little bit better. Yeah, great thought though. Yeah, man.
How do you organize your CSS?
So, we've been working on trying to standardize that here at Ray Ward because, every developer's they're going to approach organization on their own. They have patterns they fall back on. I discovered, God, I can't think of the guy's name right now. He's from England. Damn it. But he invented a standard called inverted triangle CSS, ITCSS, where you start at a very high level where things are very specific and they only really apply very strict rules where there's one rule to that rule. And as the triangle goes down, things start getting more specific. So I organize things like that. I put, very high level includes or mix-ins or things like that at the top. And then as I drill down into component-based specific style sheets, then I'll get, my stack gets a little bit heavier at that point because I may be targeting specific classes, wrapping in that module. On the top level, we try to keep it just intuitive. I I don't use abbreviations as much because I kind of believe that a human should be able to come into a style sheet collection and be able to understand what that style sheet does and the directory that it's in. Some of us here will break out a style sheet into concerns of that style sheet. So say you have like a form. Some of our developers will break that form style sheet. I'll just dump it all into one style sheet because I feel like, looking through that and knowing the whole architecture. Some of us approach that like we'll break out the labels into an independent style sheet, our inputs, any of our messaging, things like that. We just try to keep it organized and not chaotic. And what we're really working on now is a pattern that we all can understand, and we all kind of start from that from the get-go. Like we've been using Yeoman for a build tool and kind of starting from a boilerplate at that point. So any of our directory structures can be, we know that the next project's going to start with that. Now whether we adhere to that, yeah. Does that answer your question? Yeah? Cool. Thanks. Anybody else? Oh man, who won the stickers? God, this is a hard one. I've got another pack, so. Yeah.
How do you feel about using CSS frameworks such as, Twitter Bootstrap, or kind of doing it yourself?
I don't use those. I just coming from, I've been in the business for a long time. I totally understand the gains that gives, developers. I just like to do everything custom. A lot of what we do here, we're never really designing sites that are going to use predefined stuff like that. Like we really try to approach everything as custom, and this is its own ecosystem and feel to the site. So I think if your requirements use it and you're limited on time, go for it. They provide a lot of good patterns out of the box. Some of it is difficult to customize, and I would say that'd be my only caution is don't try to use it and then go crazy out of the box, because that's just going to add bloat and probably have some performance impacts. But I don't think there's anything wrong with them. I just don't personally use them. Now I say that my justinholt.com is super freaking old. Like I haven't updated it in probably 3 years. You know that old saying, the shoe cobbler's children are barefoot. So if I'm gonna have time to do stuff, I'm gonna be studying new stuff like this, or reading. So I'm intending on redoing it at Christmas. But I built it in Gumby because I didn't have a lot of time, and I really just was like, I need something that's gonna provide me modals and video players and all of that out of the box. If I had to do it again, I wouldn't approach it like that. Just because of customizing it, they're not really intended for too much customization, But again, they're useful for their use cases.
So you mentioned Yeoman.
Yeah.
Is that the SCSS transpiler?
No, that's actually a JavaScript package that essentially is just a task runner. It will scaffold a site. It just uses a lot of NPM packages to copy files, template files if they need to be, and it just condenses all of that together with a bunch of prompts. So you run that in the command line, and it's the way I have it set up, it's asking you a bunch of questions about your environment, stuff for the humans.txt file, social meta, things like that. And then I have boilerplate code for those different packages. Like we have one for CodeIgniter, one for Craft CMS, which we use a lot. We have one for just a static, normal PHP site that we're not using a framework. And Yeoman takes my answers to those questions, plugs it into templated files, and then creates, the boilerplate for me, and then goes ahead and writes everything. So I can run a Yeoman build, takes maybe 2 minutes, and you just hit the ground running. I've already got my framework, everything's already good to go, and it's just a time saver.
Okay,
Now,
so maybe a competitor to Grunt and Gulp?
no. So Grunt and Gulp are more of a build tool. So they're taking Gulp would happen after you use Yeoman. Yeoman is just basically a scaffolding tool. So instead of just copying and pasting files or copying a directory into your new site's directory at that point, you use Yeoman to then give you kind of a leg up on making sure that you're not just copying some old project that may have some bugs in it or something like that. You're starting from scratch each time. So Gulp and Grunt they process, your source files at development time. So you would have, raw CSS, raw JavaScript that hasn't been compiled or transpiled. SVG sprites could be in all one directory, and then Gulp runs through, or Grunt, and performs a bunch of actions on that. Runs things like we have auto prefixer piped in, like SVG Go to optimize SVGs. We run some image optimization tools in that, and then our workflow is we have that constantly running. So as I'm writing CSS, it's compiling that into production ready. It's triggering live reload to then refresh my browser. It's doing all of those cool image things if I need it to. It's just a big time saver and provides consistency to the stack. Yeah. Yeah.
Are you using HTTP2?
So we have been investigating that. We primarily work with Liquid Web as a hosting partner, and they do have support for it, but as our high-level admin started looking into it, there's a lot of other stuff that goes into your Apache or your Nginx config to make all of that work properly. So we're getting there. I just wrote a blog post that's up on the Ray Ward website this week about new performance things like PHP 7, HTTP2, some of the new image formats that are coming out, like WebP and stuff like that. And I mentioned that on the surface, it seems like it's a really simple thing. It's not. So just make sure your ducks are in a row before you go down that route. But we're aiming to try to switch everything over by like summer of next year. We're a small team and supporting a lot of websites, so it's great, but it's going to change a lot of the patterns that we depend on. We're going to have to unlearn a lot of stuff. Like all of our transpiling and compiling stuff to minimal files, all that's out the window now. And so what this does bring into the picture is modular based and code splitting and stuff like that, to where, with HTTP2 and a lot of thought and planning put into it, you really could just ship down the pipe exactly what that page needs or that module needs at the moment, and you're not sending all this other fluff that, we just have to deal with these days. I think it's awesome. It's going to take some work to get there.
Yeah, that's what my server guy said.
Yeah.
Came back from a talk just a couple weeks ago and was excited and said, yeah, they said you just have to enable it. And then he looked at it, he was like, no,
Nope.
there's all this other
Yep.
stuff that I got to compile in. And
Yep.
no, you can't do that.
I think the gears are really turning for people right now in their heads, and they're trying to solve this. But again, it's going to impact everybody that's involved in a web product, from design to production to even content, really, at that point. But as you move more into thinking about code splitting and really, like I said, sending exactly what the browser needs down the pipe, HTTP2 is exactly what we need for that. Now, performance, we have been shipping PHP 7, and that we've seen tremendous gains from that. We use Craft CMS a lot, and that running even 2, which is they're about to launch Craft 3 next year, and just Craft 2 running between 5.4 and 7. I mean, it's night and day. Yeah. They're like Jaws of Life and the new Ray Ward website that we just launched. They're both running on PHP 7, and I mean, it's speedy. It's a great experience, yeah. You got another one? Go for it, man. Yeah.
Sorry.
No, go for it.
How does, and excuse my ignorance, but you were talking about the vibration and the different phone,
Mhm.
connections to the phone hardware.
Mm-hmm.
How does it know, am I dealing with an iPhone this or an iPhone that or an Android, or, how does it know? Because I'm sure the hardware calls are different.
A lot of that is starting to become standardized
User
more.
agent
Yeah,
or something?
it may detect a user agent. That may not be as dependable as what we'd expect, but
So many different pieces of hardware out there.
I think as the mobile OSs evolve, they've realized that we've got to standardize those experiences, and just like Web Bluetooth is a good example. Like, it's going to have to use the Bluetooth low energy profile because that's what's out there and that's what's standard. So Yeah, it's just experiment with it and see. I haven't built one yet, but I really want to, and we've got a client now that we're in talks of making a PWA. I'm super excited about
React, Vue, or Angular?
that. Haven't used a JavaScript framework yet, but I think Vue is probably where I'm leaning towards. Like, you'll see in that, if you go to that website, with all my links, there's a bunch of folders in there, and I've got a big one about React because I kept saying, I'm going to learn this shit. You watch, I'm going to do this Christmas. I'm going to read all this right here. Oh, wait, maybe I'll do it over Easter. I'll learn this over Easter. July 4th. I'll do it over July 4th. I'm serious. So, you know, when you work in an ecosystem where you're not using those tools and you're churning out sites, it's difficult to pick up a new one. I think they're awesome. They each work in their own ways that are perfect, and you've got people that hate them, and you know, it's just a part of web. But I think if I'm going to take on anything, it's probably going to be React or Vue. I think Vue's pretty awesome, and the people behind it are really forward thinking. Probably not Angular, but you know. Sorry, Doug. Okay, anybody else? No? You're the sticker guy.
Oh, thank you.
Sounds like you got the most out of my answers there. Cool. All right, so the big thing, giveaways. So I picked up 2 awesome books recently that I really thought would help some of our attendees here. So a PDF that I go to a lot is by this lady here. Her name's Joni Treinthal, and she does a great job of visualizing all of the Flexbox rules with nice little pictures of fruit. And I seriously, even though I've been doing this and I've been using shipping Flexbox for like 2 years, every time I start, I have to go back and look. Oh, what does that rule do? I need to look at this again. So she made a nice little pocket guide that's all of this. It's kind of short and it's not super detailed, but it's a great thing to keep on your desk to flip to real quickly. And Rachel Andrew just came out with the Book Apart new CSS layout where she goes really in depth into Grid and Flexbox and how they work together. Rachel's also the new editor of Smashing Magazine, so we can expect Smashing to have a lot more cool articles. But this is a great book, man. If you pick this up, you will definitely, Grid will click. Like, it's just like she does a great job of explaining the concepts and then actually how you use this in real world examples. So Richard's going to pick 2 random attendees from the RSVPs, and you'll win a book. And you got to be here.
Oh, there it goes. All right, cool. All right, let's see. Brandon? Here? Nope.
Oh, Brandon's a loser. He's not a loser. He's a good guy.
Michael? Here's Erlich.
Hey, cool. I would bring it to you, but I'm attached to a lavalier mic, so pull all my gear down.
All right, got one more?
Yep.
All right.
Dub man. Nice. Sweet.
All right.
Is that like Bartman?
Lloyd? Dave.
Oh. You should probably do it.
Oh, I think you got the stickers. Okay.
No, that was dude.
Actually, I trained somebody for this.
Okay, that's
Okay,
cool.
all right.
You know, somebody was.
A little raffle stickers.
You'll probably get good use out of that too, I think.
Morgan?
I don't know what I said.
Morgan. Morgan.
Cool. Stickers for Morgan.
Oh, okay.
Awesome.
Awesome.
There you go.
So just a couple more things. You got it?
Yeah, I get this cord twisted a little bit.
It's the law of physics that anytime you have an HDMI or a USB, you're going to plug it in upside down the wrong first time.
Got it right.
It doesn't matter. It's always going to do that. Yeah. Dun, 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 dun. All right, so if you were here before the talk and you heard that really awesome music that was playing in here, that's one of our employees, one of our designers named Dave Hare, and he does an awesome SoundCloud site called Up Down. And I'd love for you to check it out. If you ever happen to, I don't know why you would ever do this, but if you call Ray Ward, you're put on hold, his music is what plays in the background. It's all instrumental. It's the best beats ever. I love his stuff. So again, resources, go to this website if you need links. And if you need awesome beats, go to this site. So thank you guys. Thanks everybody for attending tonight.